Well, welcome to the X Podcast. So excited to have you back for another episode. And I have a great friend with me today on this episode, Matthew Johnson.
What's up?
He is one of my longtime friends. How long have we been friends?
Wow.
2011, maybe 11, 12, probably 10 years.
Yeah,
maybe at least 10.
I became lead pastor 2011.
So it's probably shortly after that.
Yeah.
So about 10 years.
Yeah.
And he pastors and leads a church in about 20 minutes from us. And incredible leader, incredible thinker. His church is blowing it up, doing amazing things in Lancaster, Ohio. And
Thank you.
So you've been on here before.
I have,
we did a
yeah.
podcast before and we talked about leading through COVID years ago. And so thankfully COVID doesn't exist anymore.
If that's someone's only knowledge of me, I was a little jaded at that point.
Yeah,
we
were all
so tired.
We were all a little bit jaded at that
It
point.
was you, me, and Keith.
I hate people.
Yeah, we were a little worn out.
And but good news is we don't have a virus anymore. COVID doesn't exist anymore. Okay, I'm just joking a little bit.
I just came from the doctors and I had to wear a mask.
Oh, you did?
First
So never
time I've
mind.
worn a mask in a long time.
Okay, so we do still have COVID,
Yeah.
but I'm glad to have you on the podcast today. You are replacing Russ, and so we had to get rid of the nepotism that was going on since
Yeah.
we're both Moors,
Yeah.
even though we're not related. But I'm glad to have you on here.
I'm glad to be here.
How are you doing?
I am doing well. Yeah. I am thankful we're not in that season that we were
Yeah.
in last time. But yeah, I'm honored to be here. I love your church.
Yeah.
It was cool. Even recently, one of our pastors, Michael, was here
Yeah.
to lead worship.
Yeah.
And
And
I'm
you're coming
thankful for that.
soon?
Yeah,
You
I
still-
just realized on the way here I was supposed to tell you the official date. Yeah, I could tell you by the end. But when we're done with this, I'll tell you the date.
Okay.
And,
So anyways, he's going to be speaking at our church coming up soon this fall.
and you spoke not super
Not
long
too
ago,
long.
a couple
June.
months ago.
Yeah.
And
so-
sold out your books. Our church loved it.
They
It was
did.
really a
That was
blessing.
awesome. That was
Yeah.
huge. So I'm glad you're here with me today. I want to talk about something that is a little bit, I'm going to put you on the hot seat today. We're going to be on the hot seat a little bit for this.
Sure.
Maybe not, but there's an article that I was reading and I sent it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, hey, would you come and talk with me about this? There was an article that I sent you and I just read, it came out maybe a week or two ago. I can't remember, but talked about this Christian nationalism. And I think even the title was something like, it was taboo, but now it's kind of becoming mainstream almost, or this idea of Christian nationalism. And I don't know if probably everybody knows what Christian nationalism is, so we can talk a little bit about it. But
Sure.
I think there's some really interesting things about this idea of Christian nationalism. And I think anytime you attach something to the word Christian, everything automatically gets assumed that it's because you and I are Christians.
Right.
We say that unashamedly, and we sit in this podcast and we talk about just life and culture and all kinds of things, and we do it as two humans. But we also know that our faith informs us, and it's a filter for how we see the world. And so I just thought it would be good for us to talk about it. In fact, I'll give you a little bit of a setup, and then I want to get your take on on this, the rise of Christian nationalism.
Sure.
What has happened is there are now politicians that are seeming to embrace this. This isn't something that came from, let me just say, the evangelical world. That more so. I mean, I think it exists in it, but being labeled and really coming to the forefront is because of what we're seeing happen with politicians. Like, for example, one of them most notably is Marjorie Taylor Greene, which she's kind of larger than life, part of Congress. And she's, I think, a representative in Georgia. I should have looked that up. I think it's where she is. But she came out and said she was a Christian nationalist.
Yeah.
In fact, she went so far as has a T-shirt that she's selling on her website, her shop, that basically says "Proud Christian Nationalist" and has a cross on it.
Yeah.
And one of her statements that she said, I just found this kind of fascinating. I don't know, see if I have it, that I wrote it down. I did write it down. But one of the statements that she said was something along the lines of, I'm an American and I'm also a Christian. And she said this about the Republican Party. She said, the Republican Party, we are pro-God. She continues to make the argument that if you're with the left, then you're godless. Okay. And that we need to, and I'm a Christian, and she thinks everybody in the Republican Party should be a Christian nationalist. And so when you hear the term Christian nationalist and you hear people like, and she's not the only one, there are other representatives that have come out and basically said, yes, I'm a Christian nationalist, and what that means. What goes through your mind? What do you hear in regards to that?
Man, that's such a broad question. In some ways, what that means, like you have to define what that definition is, because Christian nationalists used to be those who thought the nation was founded on Christian ethics, Christian principles, and we need to go back to that. The founding fathers were all Christians. Truthfully, if you look at it, that's a very inaccurate view of history. Our nation was definitely influenced by Judeo-Christian principles, but it was not founded on Christian principles, as is oftentimes explained. So Christian nationalists, for some, it was those who wanted to go back to that. So we need to go back to Christian values. But nowadays, it has kind of morphed into something else where for some, it's still that extreme. For others, it just means I'm an American who is also a Christian, and I am passionate about both of these things. I'm very patriotic. I'm pro-America. And what shapes my passion is my faith, and sometimes that gets distorted, and sometimes that gets out of order. So for me as a Christian, I don't like the idea of having Christianity attached to anything else besides God, and that really does feel dangerous to me because, like even with like the article you sent me, it's written by, I'm assuming, a non-Christian, and I didn't find the article disrespectful.
No.
But what I've observed, I think most people probably have, is non-Christians, when they observe Christianity, it's confusing to them.
Right.
And so there are times that their opinion is actually inaccurate. So like this person says, Christian nationalist is becoming mainstream. I would push back and say, I doubt that's actually true. I don't think, from the circles that I run in, people like you and the other pastors that we have as friends, not only locally, but I would say regionally and nationally, I don't know any of them that would classify themselves as Christian nationalists. But the problem is those who have the cameras, you're smirking.
I can think of one.
We can think of one, right.
Sorry, I wasn't going to say it.
But where was I going with this?
Sorry.
No, it just threw me off. But I would say
yes. I don't think it's widespread in the Christian movement that's going on.
But the person who's looking at from the outside in, the people who get the television time, the people who are getting the press, are like even the representative that you talked about. She's like, can we be controversial?
Sure, go ahead. This is you. You can be controversial, and I'll just let everybody
share this with anyone in my church.
Yes.
No, but I think sometimes she has the same effect as a shock jock to me, like the radio shock jock, where they're just saying controversial things because it gets them attention. It gets them headlines. It keeps them in the forefront of the discussion, and it does play to a certain base. There are some people that are stirred up by that. The problem is she's using the name of Christianity, attaching it to her political means and her strategy. And this is all getting confused. So the non-Christians are confused by this. It's the same thing you deal with where TBN will put stuff on Christian television that's not mainstream Christianity, but non-Christians see that and they think, well, that strange stuff that we see on TBN, that's what all Christians are like. And the average Christian's like, no, we're not. We're nothing like that. I think the same thing with this discussion is my experience is the average pastor is just trying to preach the gospel, trying to lead people toward Christ. While still, there's politicalness. I'm not doubting that. There's a lot of political elements, but I think to that extreme, I still think that's in the minority. I could be naive, but I think that's in the minority, but I also think it's super unhealthy.
I bet, though, that I agree with you. I think that there's a spectrum when it comes to this, what is being called Christian nationalism.
Sure.
There's more and more people writing about this now. I found several articles from large news organizations and some small ones that all have come out in the last couple of weeks.
Right.
So it's kind of gaining some traction because it's making headlines.
Right,
I'm not saying
wouldn't you say that all that you've read are secular?
No.
Oh, you've seen some Christians that are promoting this?
No, not promoting it, but I guess I've seen articles, and most of them have had evangelical leaders who have been rejecting it more so than embracing it. Yes, they have been. But I think, and so here's the thing, I think there's a spectrum, and this is what I want to say. I think we're not saying, because I agree with you, I'm not a big fan of attaching anything to Christian.
Right.
To me, I think the moment you do that, you're distorting what it actually is. Mm-hmm. And I think that the problem is that it's deceptive. In other words, there's a spectrum of this in, there are people that, on the not Christian nationalists, but could move in that direction. And I'll give you an example of where I think we saw this begin to shift a little bit, is the God and country type of mindset, right? And there's a lot of them. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like you said, I have a faith that's really strong in God, and I also love my country.
Right.
And I am patriotic, and I think there's nothing wrong with being patriotic. There's nothing wrong with loving where you're from, whether it's America or whether it's a country in Europe or in Africa, South America, Asia. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud of your heritage, proud of where you come from, and being patriotic in that sense. I don't think there is. The problem is we're fusing them together. That's what we're talking about. And I think it can sometimes be a slippery slope. Now, I'll give you an example of something that bothered me, and I think where I believe kind of brought it into the light, and through conversations with people in the church, I can sense that because of what is going on politically, and there's a polarization happening politically, that there are people that are just sliding further to that extreme. To me, what happened January 6th with the Capitol Riots,
right.
The thing that as a follower of Jesus and as a pastor that bothered me, not only the assault on democracy that we have, but was seeing massive Jesus banners, Christian banners that people were holding in this crowd of people. And I know not everybody that had the same plans, and we're there to try to actually, violently overthrow and all of that. I know that, but from the perspective of watching it, I mean, massive, huge Jesus banners and other things at the same rally where people are screaming, "Get Mike Pence and hang him."
Right. Yeah.
So now we've got this crossing over of faith and politics,
right,
that I think can actually be dangerous. Like, we all have political mind. We all, you have political thoughts. You're getting ready to talk about politics, matter of fact, because you preach on politics all the time at church. No, I'm just kidding. He doesn't do that.
You need to give context.
No, I'm teasing. He does not. But you are addressing politics, and I think in many ways almost this conversation.
I am.
You are, which is funny because I'm the one that brought the topic. I'm like, you want to join me this week? And I think you're actually, I think this is going to air this week, but I think this coming Sunday you're actually preaching on it, which is cool. I love the fact that you'll take that on.
Yeah.
You have a lot more guts than I do. That's why we'll do it in a podcast. No, I'm not. I'm joking. I will.
You'll handle tough topics. My entire series that we're in right now is addressing controversial topics,
and I love that
because I think we have to. If we stay silent, the world's not staying silent.
Yeah.
The world's screaming.
Yeah.
And I think I'm glad you're addressing this topic because the world is talking about this misconception of Christianity because a small percentage of so-called Christians are modeling this. Like you talked about January 6th. I would push back and say a lot of the people that are holding Jesus banners should have put those down and picked up their Bibles and read actually about Jesus because they're not representing him. The way that they speak, the way they acted, the disrespect, the dishonor, the violence, like there's so much to it that I think even in that season, I think a lot of Christians and some pastors were just worn out from the whole fight of it.
Yeah.
But and so it got a little bit confusing. But and people got mad. People left churches and they're like, well, you just don't love the country enough or this and that. But the reality is, if we can strip away all of that and go to the scriptures, we can easily prove that behavior is not of God.
Right.
And so I think we have to have this discussion. And I think it's not a problem to love your country, but at some point, you have to decide what you are. Are you a Christian who's an American or an American who's a Christian? In the sense, which one is going to be the deciding factor? Because
describe the difference between the two of those. Because I think some people would go, what do you mean? I'm an American and I'm a Christian. What's the difference? What you put first?
At times, those are in conflict. There are times that Christianity and being an American are in conflict.
Wow. Okay. You're going to need to unpack that.
Yeah, I will. I mean, so there are times as an American, we have rights as an American. I have a right to free speech.
Yeah.
Okay. So I can say things. That doesn't mean I'm free from consequence. We know that.
Yeah.
But I can say whatever I want. So I have a right as an American. As a Christian, I don't have a right to free speech. Now, a lot of people would be shocked by that. But if I believe what Jesus said, anyone wants to come after me, they have to be willing to take up their cross daily, follow me. It is the image of dying to self, surrendering rights to Jesus. Jesus now determines what I say and what I don't say. I mean, there's enough scriptures that talk about what comes out of our mouths, from the Old Testament to the New Testament. The power, or our tongues have the power of life and death. And Jesus talks about the words that we speak. And so if I'm a Christian first, then I surrender my right to free speech and recognize, no, I need to have life-giving speech. I have freedom in America to do things like to break relationships. I have the freedom to not forgive. Like, there's no laws against it. So as an American, I have all these rights. And I could go on and on. As a Christian, I don't. As a Christian, I have to release and forgive. I have to show love. I have to love my enemies as a Christian. As an American, I don't. So at some point, there will be conflict of those two
Or here's
things.
one that maybe just think about it too, just to add another one so people can see the difference. Like 1 Corinthians 5, Paul says that what business is it of ours to judge those outside of the church?
Absolutely. Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And judge those inside the church, those who do. There needs to be a level of accountability if you claim to follow Christ and you're in the community, but outside of it. But so there's a whole freedom of speech in that. But as a Christian, you're not free to go out and cast judgment, condemnation on those who don't believe. You're actually supposed to love them.
For sure.
And you're supposed to serve them. And so I agree. I agree.
In the same book, Paul says Christians shouldn't sue each other. So as Americans, we can sue each other, right? Christians shouldn't. So at some point, there's going to be a conflict, and you have to decide what conviction dictates your behavior. So am I a Christian, so first, or am I an American first? And I think that's where the problem is. I'll say it bluntly. Those who really embrace politics, my experience with them is when push comes to shove, they're Americans first. Yeah. And they'll say stuff like, well, at some point, enough is enough, as if that is a true statement that excuses the dishonorable behavior that dishonors God and their faith. And so, I think we have to say, okay, you have to wrestle with which one, because when they conflict, and I'll say this, Christianity often conflicts with politics. That's what I'm going to be expressing this Sunday is, and when people want to say, well, not the Republicans, because like even what you talked about, that there's a belief that all liberals, all Democrats are evil, godless, and all Republicans are Christ followers and they're honoring God. I'm sorry, you have to shut your brain off to actually believe that. Yeah. I think both sides have evil. I think there are some things.
I think there are good people in both.
There's good in both, and there is evil in both. And when I talk about this with people in my church and when I'm having conversations about it, you have to recognize the goal of politics is not to lift Christ high. The goal of politics is to make a country better by some political strategy.
For everyone.
For everyone. But the ultimate goal of politics is a nation. Truthfully, it's to keep people in power, right?
Yeah.
That's what politics is. Okay. But I'm saying, like, if you look at how it's designed, politics are to make a country better and not necessarily lift God higher. And so when you get behind politics, you are just by nature getting behind idolatry, because you're getting behind something that is going to elevate it above God. So as Christians, we have to take a step back and go, I'm a Christian first, and recognize in my Christianity, I'm sure we're going to get to this, but in my Christianity, I can engage these things. But when there's conflict, I have to follow Christ first.
I want to pause there for a moment, because you just said something I want to just clarify for people. Sure. It's like you said, if you get into politics almost, or if you're underneath that, then it's idolatry. I think you and I would both probably agree that there's nothing wrong with having political views or being involved. You and I would say, hey, being a politician or being that, there's nothing wrong with that. What you're saying is, when it comes to how we behave, when it comes to the things that are going to matter most, at some point we have to decide, what is informing how we behave and how we believe. Yeah. Is that what you're saying? Because you can. I understand. I just wanted to clarify so people didn't think that you were anti-politics.
No, I was saying in line of what I had previously said. If there's a conflict of the two and you choose politics, you are choosing idolatry. Yeah. In the sense of, if you're allowing politics to trump over.
Funny.
Pun intended, right?
It's so hard. You can't use that word anymore.
And I'm not being flippant. I know.
But I know.
So if you allow that to dictate your behavior, then you're now saying it is
more important.
This is dramatic language, but this is biblical language. That truly does become an idol or God to you, because it's dictating your behavior. And that's where it becomes dangerous. And so I think if your heart is to pursue Christ, and in that context follow the calling, some people will be called to politics, and that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. The same way that people are called to be teachers and they're called to work in the retail industry. When you follow the pathway that God has laid before you, that's a beautiful thing. Hebrews 12 talks about it, that set aside the sin and the weight and run the race that has been set before you. We all have different races set before us. follow that. So politics in and of itself is not bad. It's only bad when it becomes an idol or a priority over what God has commanded us to do.
When you choose a political viewpoint or party that stands in opposition to what you believe what Christ has said to do,
right,
then you've kind of picked one. And you know, so I think it's a good point to bring out that we're saying, you know, and that's a great question for everybody to process as we have these conversations. You think about politics and your involvement, because we're all involved in politics, even if you're not running as a politician, because we have conversations with family, with friends, we vote. People spread, ideas and thoughts through social media and conversation. And so I think we're all involved in it. And I think it is good for us to understand. And that's the question to ask. Am I an American who is a Christian, or am I Christian, since we're talking about Christian nationalism, who's an American?
Right.
The same question you could ask if it's any religion.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Am I American who's a Muslim, or a Muslim American?
Right.
And it doesn't matter what it is. And so in this topic, we're talking about Christian nationalism. And I think one of the things that you and I feel the effects as a leader in the Christian church or movement that's going on in our country right now, even though we have our own small local pockets of it, is that this ideology is labeled and is almost, from the outside perspective, like you said, I think a lot of us internally, but from the outside perspective, when people see Christian nationalists, they just think, oh, all Christians are like that.
Sure, I really do believe that.
I think
we spend a lot of energy
trying to convince
people we're not like that.
We're not like that.
We spend a lot of energy trying to undo that misconception.
Yeah,
at least I do.
I am.
I think any church that's reaching new converts, people that weren't raised in the church and Christianity, that's like the first barrier.
Yeah.
And so, I think by doing podcasts like this, oftentimes what you'll get is people will listen from the outside and go, oh, wow, so not all Christians are that way. And it becomes really that entry level. So I'm thankful that there are churches that are doing this, because unfortunately, like you said, this is the image that outsiders have of Christians.
Well, and I also think too, so there's the outside perspective. Then I want to talk about the inside perspective, because I think there are some who might be listening to this now who are really, really patriotic. I heard someone say on a podcast a while ago, and they were trying to process the whole guns movement, and why there's this obsession. And these are people who are from LA. You get people from Australia and other countries that don't have the gun culture that we have here in America, and they can't understand for the life of them why so many people are obsessed with guns.
Sure.
But one of the things that they brought out that I just thought was a fascinating insight was some people from LA. They're saying one of the things we need to recognize, this was West Coast, they said a lot of the people that are pro-military, pro-gun, pro-God and country come from the middle of the country. We're in the middle of that. It's not from New York, Miami, LA, Seattle. It's not these fringe coast cities that are, you know what I mean? They're just... It comes from Iowa, and it comes from Nebraska, and said that many of the people who actually join our armed forces who come from a tradition of that. My dad served in the Air Force, and that served, they come from the breadbasket. They come from the middle of the country, which is kind of where we find ourselves.
Right.
And so with that, I think that there is a sense of patriotism that maybe exists in this portion of the United States that maybe is different looking than it is on there. It doesn't mean that people aren't for their country on the West Coast and East Coast, but it might look different. And because of that, I think there's some people that might say, man, well, it sounds like you're just not really for our country. And I think that's the other side of the extreme that I feel like we're constantly trying to have to fight too.
Yeah.
When we talk about something like Christian nationalism, it's not that we aren't pro our country or not for our country. I love my country.
Right.
And I love those, and I deeply respect and honor those who serve for our country. But I think there's also, this is what is a little bit of my concern in some of the conversations I've had with different people, is I actually think the Christian nationalism, as we've talked about and labeled it, might be easy to see for us. But I think that there are a lot of people that are so passionate about patriotism, and they have a faith that it can be easy to just begin to slide further and further. In fact, there was one quote that was by in one of the articles that I read that basically said, if the left is all about this or whatever, it was like the godless, whatever, liberal, progressive country, then I don't mind being considered a Christian nationalist. Like, in other words, I'll pick up the label because the end goal is to combat what's happening from the other side. Politically.
Yeah.
And so I actually think that it's important just to talk about this from a Christian perspective. I'm talking about that there's a danger in the deception that could happen even within our churches that could lean that direction, though they don't have a label or they don't carry it. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think when we look at patriotism, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
We have an incredible country.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Americans, I think at times this can be annoying when we say it, but I think other countries could say it, and it doesn't offend me, but we say we live in the best country ever. Because from our experiences, our nation has allowed us to have so many incredible opportunities and privileges. Patriotism's not bad. Where the problem, I think, lies for a lot of people, and the tension we're feeling now, is every people group thinks there's ways for our nation to be improved. So, like, one thing that always annoys me is when people say the comment, "If you don't like America, leave it." Yeah. That's such an arrogant and un-American comment, because in America, we don't leave it if we don't like something. We fix it. We change it. I mean, that was the beauty of the structure.
We vote for it. Democracy.
We vote, right. That's the beauty of America, was there's going to always be brokenness, this imperfect union that's made more perfect by us working through things and evaluating, critiquing, and changing things.
In order to form a more perfect.
Right.
Right.
That's the concept, but that's an ongoing thing. It will never be perfect, right? It's always going to be in transition. Well, so one group that loves America feels threatened by the other group that still loves America, but they want to change it in different ways because they have different value systems. And I think we first, just as people, I would say as Christians, but as people, have to learn to not be threatened by other people's opinions. People, they have different value systems. And so it might be completely foreign to us, but it's a different value system. Let's engage in conversation, and then let's use our rights, and let's vote, and let's have really healthy conversations, and even be persuasive to get our friends to vote, because that's the system that's in place. I think that's lost. So I think people are defensive. They see anyone who views things differently as the enemy. And so therefore you're the enemy, and now I have to attack you. I have to tear you down. And I think that's super unhealthy. But I also think for us as Christians, where we have to hit the pause button is to take a step back. And this is what I'm about to say, you expect a pastor to say, right? Yeah. It's going to be Christianese to some degree. But like, I'll just ask you the question. What is the absolute best thing that could happen to America? The absolute best thing that could happen to America. What do you think?
Wow.
I'm just saying, like,
unity?
No. Go even deeper.
Oh, you want me to go religious?
I want you to go as
Every single person comes to Christ.
Right, okay.
That's right. That's what it said. Everybody becomes a Christian.
Now, you said it like kind of with a funny...
but I mean, it's just, that'd be my perspective, right? And because of what I
Is that true what you just said? Yes, right? Like, it's true. As Christians, the greatest thing that could ever happen to our nation is not all the secondary and third level things, like reform and even like
education.
In education, right? Reform in education and the undoing of abortion. Those are very important things that's being debated. But the greatest thing that could ever happen to our nation is for the hearts of our nation to turn to Christ. And so in our behavior, when we're fighting for these secondary things, and in that process, creating division, ruining the reputation of Christianity, breaking relationships with people who view differently, we are actually hurting our nation, because what we're called to do is to lead people to Christ. So if that's the greatest thing that can happen to our nation, if that's the way to heal our nation and to lead it toward health, then the secondary things, I need to put them in their proper place and recognize I don't want to break a relationship over a secondary third level thing, fourth level. You know what I mean? Like, I want to value what Christ values. And so I want the relationships to be open.
And the first thing that you talked about in that priority is all about building bridges.
Right.
It's not about breaking them over different policies and different ways.
But that's what we're being taught to do, is to break bridges, burn them down. Look at the other person as the enemy. You can't you can't have a healthy conversation if you view the other person as an enemy.
Yeah.
And that's what people are. I mean, like this past, so
what are you
Sundays
supposed
ago,
to do with your enemies anyways if you're a Christian? I mean, let's not talk about love your enemies.
tear 'em
Let's talk
down
about
on
pray for
Facebook,
them.
unfriend them.
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, this is, like you said,
Pray for them.
the whole idea of if you don't think the way I think and believe what I believe, then you're my enemy. Okay, fine. If you say that, then let's just go to what Jesus said, which is love your enemies.
Right.
Pray for them. Bless
Yeah.
them. Like, I mean, again, you can't keep going back to this identity politics
Right.
and mash it together with what Jesus said.
Right.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, and it really is hard to get passionate about political elements and speaking about them when Jesus himself didn't. When he didn't choose the political route and to undermine Caesar and to speak about every bad practice that was in political. When Jesus, who's our example, didn't do it, it's really hard to get passionate and say like, but I'm supposed to do it. I'm supposed to burn bridges. And Jesus, the only one, I mean, you can look at in Scripture, the only one you could use the term harsh with or aggressive with were religious leaders. Yeah, was within the religious community of people who were claiming to represent Jesus or represent God, and were doing it in an unhealthy and unbiblical way. He confronted them, but to the sinners, he had dinner with them. Yeah. To the tax collectors, he invited himself over. And so that's the model we have. Like, there could not have been in their culture someone more unlike God than the tax collectors and the prostitutes and the sinners, and Jesus built bridges with them. And so in our culture, we look at the opposite political party and say, there's no one more unlike God, right? I mean, that's what we were talking about.
The lawless left is what they were saying,
left.
or the godless left, sorry.
Or both of those, right? Yeah, and that's their perspective. And so they view that as a reason to end relationship, and that's not what Jesus would do. People will hate this comment. If Jesus was here, he would be having dinner with Republicans and Democrats alike, and it would offend everyone the same way that when he was here on earth, he offended everyone. When people take a step back and they realize Jesus' ultimate goal was greater than the temporary of what was going on in culture 2,000 years ago. He had a greater vision. We have to realize that what's going on in our politics and in our country right now is not the biggest picture. What we can do now can have a generational impact, and that needs to be our passion, because every generation is getting worse because we're modeling to our children the most unhealthy forms of relationships and conflict, and that's dangerous.
No, for sure. And there's a book that I've told you about that I love, that I know you're reading a long list of books right now. But just to add to your point about Jesus and how he was in his day, because everybody thought he was going to be the political person that would uproot Rome, and even his own followers did. Right. And a book that I just think every Christian needs to read some point is called Not In It to Win It by Andy Stanley. Just came out. And I'm almost finished with it, reading it. But Andy Stanley makes some incredible, I think it's his best book ever. He makes some amazing points in regards to politics and faith. And one of the title, Not In It to Win It, is basically Jesus's model was not to win. Okay, we all, the problem with politics is we're always in it to win. It's like, I want my party to win. I want my person to win, be in office. I want to beat you. I want to defeat you. You're the enemy. And Jesus, the way he won was by losing. He gave up his life. He gave up his rights. He did that. And he calls his followers to do the same thing. We're not here. And one of the statements that I just love, one of my favorite statements Andy Stanley said in there, was he said, I think we get the mission wrong. The mission is not here in America. If you're an American, the mission is not to save America. The mission is to save Americans. It is not the same.
It's not the same.
We're not trying to save a country. We're here to reach the citizens, the people. Jesus cared about people. And it bothers me sometimes that I hear Christians in this country, as Americans, get so close-minded. They think America is the center of the world. It's the center of the universe. Can I remind you that if you are a Christian, that the guy that you follow was a Jewish, brown-skinned guy, Middle Eastern guy. So before, and America didn't exist when the Bible was written. And so I think we're so narrow-focused sometimes, and there's just a massive danger when we take a position, because that's what's happening, I think, with the Christian nationalist movement, is that it is combining the two so that we can restore politics to what we thought they should be, of going back. And the danger of using Christ to represent something more than what, or something other than what he intended to be, which was grace, and his death was for everyone, regardless of color and creed and sex and, all of those things, to me is so damaging to the name of Jesus. It bothers me. It's so damaging. And I just, one of the thoughts that I had was where we've seen this throughout history in America. If you go back and read about the history of slave owners in this country, many of them were Christians, and many of them would use passages in Scripture ripped out of the context, the heart, and the meaning, and it did not reflect God. You can make an incredible argument if you really understand Scripture that God is not for slavery, in the sense that it was at the time, enslaving black people in this country. Use that to justify enslaving people, treating them horribly, doing whatever they wanted to, so much so that there was an idea that even once people started saying, hey, wait a minute, it seems like Scripture is against this, started saying that there's a difference between your soul and your body. And your soul, hey, that's going to be redeemed, but your body here on earth, there's justification to be a slave. So that's one. You carry that all the way forward into just the last century, the Ku Klux Klan, when they're having big revivals and these things, they have an altar and they have an American flag and they have a Bible sitting on the altar together while there's a burning cross right there.
Yeah.
So this is the danger, and this is nothing new, which is trying to take and fuse some portion of the Bible or your faith into what really is your God, which is what your idea of what the country should be for you. And it doesn't matter who you are, what party you're for. Anytime you do that, to me, like you said, it becomes an idol.
Yeah. And when you're measuring idols, you can look at anything that's pulling your allegiance away from God as an idol, anything that's causing you, that where you're so passionate about it, it's causing you to operate in a way that's un-Christ-like, so not like Christ and how he operated. It's an idol. And so you have to take a step back. 'Cause I think what you worded it in your last statement, that this is really what you want. This is like your passion. And I think when you start with your own desires, our desires will always lead us away from God. I mean, if you read Galatians chapter 5, the flesh is described in the worst possible way because that's what's naturally broken now. This is what I talked with my church about this past week. We were talking about another controversial topic, and in that discussion, I was talking about desires. Our culture tells you that the answer is to follow your desires deeper. Like your desires have a way to lead you to a better life. You need to recognize your desires do not, nor have they ever led you to deeper, better life. Jesus does. When you follow Jesus, he will lead you to new ways of thinking and acting. And I think so often people are trying to sprinkle Christianity on their own desires because they do love America, but they also love their rights and they love their version of America. And so like when your version of America starts to change, if that causes you to break all your relationships, you realize you have an idol there. Because America can change for me, and I'm still going to operate basically the same way because my allegiance is to Christ. And that's how my behavior is going to be shaped by his word and his Holy Spirit guiding me. And I think that's the danger we see and we experience. And I think even during the COVID season, so the COVID season, the political unrest, the social unrest, the racial unrest, during that season, we had a lot of churches just had people check out because churches didn't fit their mold. So like we talked about this actually when Keith was on and we were here last, it didn't matter what we said or did. If we said one statement, one group said you're now woke, the other group said you're too far right or you're racist, and it was like there was no winning because everyone was trying to fit churches and Christianity into their own personal boxes, then breaking every relationship that didn't fit, and it was very frustrating because I just wanted to say to everyone, like, pause for a second, just take a breath. Get back to prayer, get back to reading the scriptures, and see if God and his Spirit is going to lead you to act the way you are. And obviously, my conviction is he's not.
Yeah. And probably most people aren't engaged in those things that are doing it. It's become a belief system, not an actual way of life.
Yeah.
And so, okay, great. And so again, my whole goal in this was, as it's making headlines, was to talk about it and really help people that maybe listen, that follow, to understand that this is actually a very deceptive thing, Christian nationalism. It doesn't mean you can't be patriotic and love your country. It's not what we're saying.
You can engage the process.
You can be in the process. You can serve your country. You can do, have a flag. That's fine. But I think we have to understand where our allegiance is. Either your allegiance is to the state or it's to a kingdom. at the end of the day. And then when they're in conflict, this is what you said earlier, then I surrender to my king,
right?
Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think one last question, and we'll wrap this up. But one of the comments in one of the articles that I read, and I think this goes with the extreme view of Christian nationalism and the original idea, which is to get back to it. Usually those that say that are advocating that we need to remove this barrier between church and state. That the barrier of church and state, we've always heard forever, that the church and the separation of church and state. And, basically to say, no, the church in its, or at least should say those principles, those ethics, should not only be leading our policy, but I read one person said that they should be teaching biblical literacy across the country. They should be really just imposing that this is the one way to believe, which I push back on that because, hey, as long as you win in a democracy and you're in the majority, then you're going to like it. But the moment you're not in the majority and you don't win, it'd be kind of like, imagine if, here in America, if they made some other religion a national religion and to practice anything other. Right. To me, the freedom that we enjoy for worship, the freedom that we enjoy means I need to protect that freedom for someone who doesn't want to.
Right.
I need to protect that same freedom because at some point it gets flipped around. But what are your thoughts on this whole idea of we need to remove this barrier of church and state, and really it's a call for the church to kind of lead the government almost in many ways. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this would be shocking to those who believe that. I think the worst thing that could ever happen to Christianity would be the removal of the separation of church and state. Because
the removal of the separation of church and state.
Like to mandate Christianity would be the worst thing that could ever happen to Christianity. So let me explain why. I'll explain it on a social level, but then on a biblical level. On a social level, you only want that removal when your religion is the one that's preferred.
Right.
The moment, though, they start mandating Christianity, if that would be the religion, you're going to have people who are not really Christ followers that are going to start to determine what Christianity looks like. Yeah. There are a lot of politicians, I mean, I'll say this bluntly, there are a lot of politicians that are manipulating Christians and claiming to be Christians because they want those votes, and then you look at their lifestyle and it doesn't reflect Christ at all. Those would be the individuals that would start to determine what that looks like. So on one level, that's horrible. But the second thing, the moment you mandate religion, you're asking the nation to resent that religion. When you try to force it down someone's mouth, it's never worked. So like if we said Christianity is the mandated religion now, then a whole generation, like every generation is rebellious, right?
They would resist.
So they would just resist it just because it's Christianity and you're being told I have to believe this, I have to learn this, they're going to resent it. But let me give you a theological reason. Mandating religion has never worked. So even with, and this would be shocking, ready? Even when God was in charge and it was a theocracy, it didn't work.
Yeah.
That's what God was showing. God was in charge. God initially didn't have kings. He had judges and he would raise up leaders. It didn't work. God allowed them to have kings. It didn't work. It's never worked to mandate religion, to mandate a belief system. The only thing that works is to trust in Jesus and in that the love to the community. So if it didn't work, and this is what God was illustrating. So I'm not saying God failed. I'm saying God was illustrating that mandating or legislating theology, it just doesn't work. So what God was showing is the only system that's going to save our country is what Jesus did. So that's why when Jesus was born, this was good news to all. This was what was proclaimed, is because this is the hope of the world. Nations rise and nations fall. Kings rise and kings fall. America rises and America could fall. God continues. And so if you put your hope into a nation, you're going to be let down. If you put your hope in Jesus, that's the hope for our country. So again, what I said earlier, if you love America, then the way to show love to America, so if you really are patriotic, the best way to show love is to love your neighbor.
Yeah.
That's the way to love the nation. Love your neighbor. Influence what you can, because all the other things are peripheral and secondary deals. But when you love your neighbor, that's showing Christ's love to them, and that's the hope of our country.
That's so good. And loving your neighbor is not loving the person who looks like you and thinks like you.
Right.
I mean, Jesus expressed that in the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, he chose like the one that would shock them all.
Everybody. But it's the person who's not like you, who doesn't think like you, who in our culture would say is your enemy.
Right.
So, I mean, loving your neighbor is loving your enemy.
I'm not a fan of changing scripture, but like if we were to teach it now, I think just where it says Samaritan, put in the group that you hate the most, the other political party, whatever those people
the Republicans,
are, right?
the Democrats, the whatever.
Put that in there, and you'd be like, oh, no, they can't be the hero of the story. I mean, this is what Jesus was illustrating. Like, he was getting them to just feel that tension, and so that they would understand your neighbor is your neighbor. Whoever you come into contact with, that's your neighbor. You come across a person lying in the street hurting, doesn't matter their political persuasion, doesn't matter their belief system, that's your neighbor. You come across anyone, that's your neighbor. Retail places, your neighbor. Your waiter, waitress, that's your neighbor. Love them.
Other political party. I love that. And just to add just a thought to that, and then we'll close this conversation. We'd love to know if you have any thoughts about what's going on in Christian nationalism. If you see this out, you can send an email or leave a comment and join in the conversation, and we're okay with that. I mean, I think too, another picture that I see where it never worked is what happened with the early church. With Rome. I mean, for the first 300 years of Christianity, it spread like wildfire. Like Nero, everybody's trying to stamp it out. Totally, like all these people are trying to get, and they can't, and it's just growing, and it's reaching people because here are a group of people who are loving people that are nothing like them, and it shocked everybody. And then you get Emperor Constantine, who ends up making it the official language, official religion in the 4th century. And right after that is when the whole thing falls apart.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it was the end of it. And so,
look at it
even in the church, it's not the end of it. I shouldn't say it was the end. It was the end of the empire anyways, but
it stopped that momentum.
It stopped the momentum of what was going on. And so the church has never won by beating someone politically.
Right.
I'm not saying you can't be involved in policies and want to, present ideas that are informed by your faith and vote that way. That's fine. That's the country we live in.
Yeah.
But it's not the means to the end.
Right.
The means to the end, Jesus said, was loving others.
Yeah. Because you see, even within Christianity, in denominations, when you have people that are starting to make decisions about what are going to happen in denominations, it's even hurting denominations. Like, we're seeing denominations right now, because of the leaders in charge, are making decisions that go against the scriptures. So this is even within Christianity. We can't legislate well. We can't, and so you're seeing the breakdown and the division because they're going away from biblical principles. So, and that's not a plug for non-denominational, but I'm saying, like, that's some of the value of it, is you're not having someone outside dictating based on what's going on in culture. So again, at this point, I think we've communicated our convictions on it, but it's a great discussion. And I hope at the bare minimum, what it does is just stirs people's hearts to just evaluate. Am I an American that's a Christian, or am I a Christian that's an American? And to wrestle with that.
It's good. So good. Well, thanks for being on here and talking about it. And as always, we love to engage in these conversations to help you and process what's going on in culture. And if this bothers you, if you're like, man, I'm super patriotic and I can't believe that you are saying this kind of stuff, here's what we always say. If you have any hate, send it to matt.johnson at, what's your email address? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But we do hope that this causes you to think a little bit. And maybe you've never even thought about Christian nationalism, because it's not really been a topic in the forefront. But you're going to see it more and more. It's not going away. You're going to see it more and more. You're going to hear from politicians. And I just want to point out, I'm really opposed to the idea of Christian nationalism.
And I think what this is going to be good, there might have been people that would take on that title in ignorance. And think like it's not that big of a deal.
I'm patriotic and I love God and I love my country. What's wrong with that?
You got to be careful, because that is a very loaded description, and people that are not Christians, when they see that, they're not going to feel honored by that. They're going to go, oh, you're one of those. So, like, even in that discussion, and if your politicians are like, no, we're Christian nationalists, and you're like, well, I like that politician, pause, because again, you have a higher calling than what politicians are doing. Yeah, so good. Well, thanks for joining us today. You can always share it with someone if it impacts you wherever you're watching this or listening to it from. We always love it when you leave comments or you send us an email. You can send an email to podcast@thex.church if you want to engage more in this conversation. Thanks for being here. Always honored. I had a great time. I love you and I love your church. Awesome. Hey, until next time, we'll see you next week.